Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's start our discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles. In today's newspaper, there are some important topics, especially for the mains exam. A lot of important articles and columns. There are a few articles related to economy, IR, social issues and polity, and few articles on internal security as well. So let's cover all the topics in complete detail so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement. In the recently announced results of UPSC CSE 2025, Unacademy learners have performed spectacularly well. Around 109 plus students, they are from the online classroom program of Unacademy who have topped the civil services exam. And this includes All India Rank 1 Anuj Agnihotri. So to celebrate this spectacular success of Unacademy's learners, we are celebrating the Manzil offer, which will provide a flat 60% off on all our IAS courses. And this is likely to help students who are preparing for 2027 and beyond. So now you can avail our subscription at just 16,999. Along with that, you will get double validity. That is, if you take a 6-month subscription, you get a 6-month free extension. The same applies for 12 and 18-month subscription as well. And if you avail a subscription of more than 18 months, you will also get CSE Assure guarantee. Under CSE Assure, let's say for some reason you don't clear the exam in your first attempt, then your next attempt is entirely on us. So those interested, please make use of this offer immediately because I'm told the offer is ending tomorrow on the 17th of March. And in another 99 hours from now, there will be a major price hike. So this price is unlikely to come back anytime soon. So those interested, please click on the link provided in the video description below. And on the subscription page, you might see a different price. So to avail the offer, you need to enter the code IAS English. So with this, let's get started and let's look at the first topic. On page number 6, there's a detailed column written by one of the former experts in the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. He talks about the volatility being seen in oil prices and how this volatility is largely shaped by perceptions more than a real risk to the disruption of the physical flow of oil. See, as you know, the ongoing Iran war has disrupted the shipment of oil mainly because of the blockade of Hormuz Strait. Hundreds of ships carrying oil and gas have been stuck in the Persian Gulf, and even the production of oil and gas has been halted by some of the Gulf countries as Iran has started targeting them. So this has created a unprecedented situation, resulting in significant rise in oil prices. Now, when you look at oil or even gas or any energy product as a physical commodity, of course, whenever there is a disruption to the physical supply, the physical flow of this commodity, there will be a price volatility that you will see in the global markets. Let's say oil from Persian Gulf does not physically reach India because of geopolitical events or because of any other threats which might be present. When there is an actual physical disruption, that is what creates the actual shortage in the market, right? So this is obviously expected to create a change in the price levels. But however, the writer takes a slightly different view as well. He says that today markets are being shaped more by perception of a risk than by the real possibility of a risk. Meaning markets are overreacting. They are being driven by geopolitical factors, geopolitical signs that emerge. And markets are calculating the future risk into the current prices, which leads to the significant jump in oil and gas prices. It's a very interesting take on what's happening in today's global economy. So let's go a little deep into this topic and try to understand this from a mains perspective. Now, when you look at markets, could be your capital markets, could be your commodity markets, they're always shaped by perception, especially because in markets we have these products such as futures and options, FNO. You have derivatives. They primarily take into account any future fluctuation which might happen in the supply of a critical commodity. So when you are anticipating certain shocks, right? And since markets are heavily driven by emotions and perceptions, even the fear of a risk, just the possibility of a risk is enough to trigger a disproportionate impact on the prices of that commodity. Even if the supply is actually not disrupted, even if alternate supplies can be arranged in the coming days and weeks, because of market perception of a higher risk due to a geopolitical event and due to the emotion driven mindset that you see in the markets when it comes to FNO products, derivative products, you often see the market overreacting to these situations and it tries to overcompensate. As a result, you see significant and very wide fluctuations in prices. Now, for example, few months ago, believe it or not, Brent crude in mid 2025 was priced at just $57 per barrel. You know what's the current price? It has jumped above $100 per barrel. The current Brent price has increased by nearly 100%. In fact, during the initial days of the Iran war, the Brent crude price touched $118 per barrel. There are few analysts who are predicting that if the war escalates and continues, that the prices might even touch $150 per barrel. Of course, there has been a slight consolidation in the last few days, but still the prices remain above the $100 mark. It hit a peak of $118 and then it has slightly corrected, but still remains above $100 per barrel. So, what we are seeing is a 100% jump in prices. Of course, there is a concern, there is a threat of future disruption in physical flow of oil. Now, doesn't mean that oil supplies have stopped entirely. Doesn't mean Persian Gulf is the only source for oil. There are multiple other geographical locations from where oil can be sourced. And the blockade at Hormuz can be relaxed. Maybe the conflict will end very soon. You never know. But despite these possibilities, the market, which tends to overreact, which is driven by emotions, driven by perception of a future risk, it reacts in a disproportionate manner, resulting in wild jumps and variations in prices of critical commodities such as oil. Now, this trend that you see in the markets, it has very serious implications for countries like India because we are an oil importing nation. Nearly 90% of our oil supplies comes through imports. Even with regard to gas, we have nearly 60% dependency on imports. See, physical disruption of supply is one challenge which we are currently facing as well, especially with regard to gas supplies. Since Hormuz is blocked, since India doesn't have sufficient strategic buffer, we are witnessing a physical disruption of gas flow to India. So, in that case, prices jumping is natural, it's expected. Because in a traditional market, basic economics teaches us that prices are determined purely by the supply demand equation, right? Any sudden fluctuation in supply or demand will alter the price accordingly. This is what we have always studied. But what if a possible risk, a future risk triggered by geopolitical events, also starts pushing the prices up? Physically, the flow might be continuing, or physically, the commodity might still be available, or we might have alternate sources. When you take crude oil, in the context of India, we've discussed over the last few days, we have sufficient strategic buffer. India can easily tide over the crisis for at least 2 months or at least up to 70 days. And we are very quickly diversifying the procurement of oil from different sources, from Russia to Latin America to Africa. We are considering buying energy from US as well. So in another couple of months, India will easily find alternative sources, which means there is no physical disruption of supply of oil to India. But despite that, we'll end up paying the price because the markets have overreacted, the prices have shot up, which means your import bill is going to jump. Now, how do you deal with this challenge? Because these are not real threats, these are perceived threats because of something that might happen in the future. Now, when you look at the role of strategic buffers, see, after Brent crude jumped to above $100 per barrel, the International Energy Agency coordinated with US and European countries, which hold on to significant strategic reserves, and they've all committed to release up to 400 million barrels of crude into the market by tapping into their strategic reserves. Now, this is again not just aimed at easing the physical flow of oil, but it's more about addressing the sentiments of the market. It's about assuring the market that there is enough supply available. Though it's very clear that physically the oil supplies have not been disrupted to that extent, it is to assure the market that in the future, in the coming days, in the coming weeks, even if the war continues, even if Hormuz remains blocked, the world can still address the demand which is present. Because see, right now, the global demand of oil per day is around 105 million barrels. This is the current global demand on a daily basis. For the global economy to run, we need around 105 million barrels per day. Now, even if you take out supplies coming from Persian Gulf, because see, Hormuz, this route, though it's critical, it's strategically vital, it accounts for one-fifth of oil supplies, around 20%, not more than that. The remaining sources that are there, from US to Russia to Venezuela to Africa, it is still enough to take care of the global demand. But though there is that guarantee that physical supply may not be really disrupted, the markets which overreact based on perceptions and emotions, based on predictability of a future risk, it creates this real situation where prices will jack up and it will affect importing nations like India. So, this is where India needs to adopt a new policy, a new strategy to deal with these fluctuations that are happening. The writer is suggesting that India should leverage smart diplomacy, diversify the oil sources, integrate market analytics into our energy policy, and also develop and integrate better maritime domain awareness. Because when it comes to oil supplies, the shipments do pass through several critical choke points. It's not just Hormuz Strait. You also have Bab el Mandeb connecting Red Sea with Gulf of Aden. We have the Malacca Strait and other similar choke points across the world, including Suez Canal, Panama Canal. The artificial canals also become a choke point. So given the fact that a lot of supplies to India passes through such choke points, it is important to develop better maritime domain awareness, to be aware of the maritime threats, the security challenges, and accordingly develop your military and diplomatic strategies. Give the assurance to the markets through your diplomatic efforts that even tomorrow, even in the coming days, supplies will be guaranteed, it will be ensured. So that requires the right signaling, the right messaging, the right communication. And you need to play a greater role in diplomacy to minimize the geopolitical risks. Geopolitical risks will always be present, especially in today's world. We need to learn better ways of managing those risks and playing a global role to try and mitigate those risks as much as possible. And with better market analytics, with better prediction of what's going to happen, if we can diversify our oil sources, keep it as diversified as possible, then India will be able to shield itself from these wild fluctuations that happen in oil prices. That's why it's important for India to retain its strategic autonomy in foreign policy, not fall under the pressure of any big power. Continue its diversification of oil sources, be it from Russia, be it from US, be it from Venezuela, be it from Iran as well. We should be willing to take that bold step to secure our oil supplies, our energy supplies, and send out the right signals, the messages. That is how you can address the emotions of the market and correct the perceptions of the market. So, this is what we learn from this interesting article, right? It helps you understand that commodity prices are not just influenced by the physical supply of the commodity. Even the possible fear, the future risk can also influence the prices. So, how can India deal with these challenges? Right? That can be a possible mains question. So, please take up this question and practice your answer writing based on what we have discussed. Now, moving on, we have another important article on page number 10 related to economy and international relations. In the last few days, we have discussed that US has opened a trade investigation against India and several other countries. Just a couple of days ago, I mentioned that the US Trade Representative has ordered investigations against 16 countries, including India, Japan, many other Asian economies, even China, Thailand, Vietnam, even the European Union. Around 16 countries and jurisdictions are under the trade investigation of the US Trade Representative. Now, here we need to understand, why is the US investigating countries like India? On what basis is this investigation being done? What are the allegations against these countries? Will this lead to new tariffs? That is what we need to learn. So let's go a little deep into this topic as well. Now, as you know, Donald Trump has built his entire foreign and trade policy on tariffs. In fact, his entire presidential campaign was built on bringing tariffs to address the trade deficit that the US often has with most of its trade partners. I mean, given Trump's economic knowledge and intelligence, he assumes that a trade deficit is automatically a bad thing, which need not be the case. Of course, trade balance should be manageable, it should be sustainable, right? Any deficit present should be within sustainable limits. But trade deficit per se is not a bad thing in economics, that too in a globalized world. US, in fact, was benefiting from the trade deficit it used to run, as it could easily procure goods, products, and commodities at a cheaper price, where they were produced at a cheaper cost in countries like India or Vietnam or Bangladesh. It would help US address the higher prices on the consumer side if the same goods were to be produced in the US market because of higher material cost, higher labor cost, etc. In fact, US was the one which pushed for such a global economic system since the 1980s and 1990s. So today, Trump rallies his political forces against the very same concept, targeting trade deficit, meaning he wants to target the trade partners like India who enjoy a significant trade surplus vis-a-vis the United States. US is one of the key markets for India for exports, right? US used to give preferential treatment as well through a system called GSP, Generalized System of Preferences for Developing Nations. It still provides this to few developing countries, but it was revoked for India back in 2018-19. During Trump's first presidency, the preferential treatment, the low tariff regime that existed was revoked by Trump for India to mainly target the trade surplus that India was enjoying. Now, the concern is, since the last year, Donald Trump has brought 25% plus 25% tariffs initially. The first 25% tariff was because of the trade surplus that India had, where US alleged that India was resorting to unfair trade practices, which was hurting US economic interests. Though it's not clearly established as to how it hurts American interests. Based on this allegation, 25% tariffs were levied on India. The remaining 25% tariff was a penalty for India buying Russian oil by bypassing the Western sanctions on Russia. So, cumulatively, India was targeted with 50% tariffs, which had a crippling effect on Indian exports to the US. Now, recently, two big developments have happened. One, India US have announced an interim trade agreement under which the US is bringing down the tariffs to around 18%. But however, this trade agreement has not been signed as of now. The penalty tariff has been removed entirely. So currently, some of the goods, they are taxed at 25%, and if the trade deal is signed, the interim trade agreement, it's expected to come down to around 18%. Now, before the trade agreement could proceed, the Supreme Court of the United States declared these tariffs as unconstitutional. Because under the American Constitution, it's only the US Congress which has the constitutional mandate to levy such tariffs. And the power doesn't really lie with the President of the United States. So, with the striking down of Trump tariffs, Trump is desperately trying to find for new ways through which additional tariffs can be brought against the trade partners of the United States. See, previously, the president had utilized an emergency provision under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. It was through this law that the president can protect American trade interests, provided if there is a sort of an economic emergency or a threat that US is facing. So by using this provision, US President Trump had levied all these tariffs against others. So now that Supreme Court has struck this down, this route has been exhausted. The Trump administration is trying to find new legal routes, new legal ways which are available to try and target those countries again with higher tariffs. So one such option that's available for the Trump administration is the Trade Act of 1974. Under the Trade Act, you have Section 301, specifically Section 301 Clause B, under which the US president can take unilateral action against countries, against foreign governments, which are allegedly resorting to unfair trade practices, which might be seen as discriminatory or unreasonable, and if it is affecting American economic and trade interests. On these grounds, US president can invoke the provisions of Trade Act and levy additional tariffs. So after the Supreme Court struck down the previous tariffs that were levied, the Trump administration has brought in interim 10% tariffs as a base tariff on every country. So every trade partner of US is currently attracting a baseline tariff of 10% because the Supreme Court struck down the previous tariffs that were levied. So every good, every product that's entering the US is currently being taxed at a baseline of 10%. Now, this was again based on special provisions under the Trade Act, which allows the president to impose such tariffs of 10 to maximum 15%, but it will remain in operation only for 150 days, not more than that. Trump had said he will increase this baseline tariff to even 15%, but this has not been imposed as of now. It has not been notified. Under the Trade Act, Trump does have the authority to levy up to 15% tariffs, but the period is capped at 150 days, not more than that. So currently, a 10% baseline tariff is being levied, but it will expire in 5 months. This is the reason why the new trade investigations have been opened by the US. By using the powers under Section 301 Clause B on specific grounds which are seen as discriminatory, which are seen as unfair, something which could affect American economic interests and trade interests. On these grounds, US Trade Representative can carry out investigations and check the trade policies of the other countries. And based on that, corresponding tariffs can be brought in through presidential orders itself. So basically, the Trump administration is preparing for this 5-month deadline. For next few months, there is no worry. They will keep on levying 10% tariffs, which will last 150 days. So they are looking at excuses to be given, right? A justification which they can find so that they can bring additional tariffs by using the provisions of the US Trade Act of 1974. Now, India is being investigated under two specific grounds. One is with regard to excess manufacturing capacity. The US is basically trying to check if countries like India have deliberately created excess manufacturing capacity beyond their domestic requirement, which means the manufacturing happening is primarily designed towards aiding exports. Now, this can be branded by US as an unfair trade practice, which can result in flooding of the American market with cheaper imports. So there are some industries, some sectors where India does have significant and even excess manufacturing capacity. For example, you take textiles, you take health and medical devices industries, or you take auto components, which is primarily produced by the MSME sector, or you take solar photovoltaic cells and solar modules. India does have some excess capacity in these areas. Even in petrochemicals, today India is a leading exporter of petrochemical products. Even in the sector of steel and aluminum, right? India is a key exporter. So in these specific sectors, the US can basically flag India through this investigation that India has deliberately created excess manufacturing capacity. So based on this accusation, if the investigation holds this line, this can be used as a justification for bringing additional tariffs on India, maybe targeting specific sectors where excess manufacturing capacity is present. The second ground on which India is being investigated is with regard to forced labor. The US is investigating whether countries like India and the others which are being investigated, are they resorting to forced labor practices in their industry? The goods being produced and exported to the US, are they a product of forced labor, which is seen as a violation of human rights and labor rights? Again, if these allegations are established by the USTR, they will use it as a justification to bring in additional tariffs on countries like India. Now, this amounts to a direct interference in your economic sovereignty. But that is the nature of Trump's diplomacy, and India would be closely watching these investigations. Of course, the investigation will take a very long time. It can run into several months. Some experts are alarmed, but some experts are saying there's nothing to worry as of now. Those who are getting alarmed is because they fear new tariffs being brought on countries like India, which might be similar to the previous 50% tariffs, which could crush India's exports and industries. But others who are saying that we need not panic as of now, they are arguing that these investigations take their own time. It takes several months. And there's no guarantee that US would use this as a justification to bring additional tariffs. Plus, India, US are negotiating of a trade agreement. And if the trade agreement can be finalized and signed by then, maybe that will help avoid the threat of additional tariffs. But however, you can't forget who's in office today. It's Donald Trump. Trump and his administration, they're known to do things which are unpredictable, right? If you had a rational actor in the White House, then you could have thought the investigation takes its own time. You have enough time to negotiate a trade agreement. But you never know how the Trump administration is going to basically exploit the existing legal arrangements to try and devise a new tariff regime. So this is where India would definitely be on the alert. It would like to watch these developments closely. And European Union and others, they're already questioning the US as to what is the source, what is the basis of this investigation. Because see, US has already signed a trade agreement with European Union last year. So through these investigations, if US levies additional tariff on EU, then what was the purpose of the trade agreement? then how can you rely on the US as a trusted partner? Whatever agreements they are signing, it'll have no value if they keep bringing such new policies each and every day. So that holds significant lessons for India as well, right? If US is not really respecting the trade agreement with their best ally, which is European Union, they can do anything with India as well. And that is why it's better for India to be cautious, to be on the alert. And that's why we should not rush into signing the interim trade agreement which has been proposed. See, Indian media went on a wild celebration in February, celebrating the proposed interim trade agreement as a big victory for India. But most experts, they warned of caution. They said exercise caution, don't rush into it. The terms of the agreement, though it was clarified, there is still a lot of opaqueness about it. US has been saying something else. India has not confirmed or denied some of the claims made by the US. So without such clarity, and in what appears to be a coerced deal, India might end up on the losing side. That's why India should not be rushing into signing any such trade agreement unless and until there is greater clarity. Plus, the Iran war has created a big disruption. The US is more distracted than ever. So it's unlikely that the trade agreement with India would be a priority for the US administration as of now. So these are some of the red flags that India should keep in mind as far as India-US trade relationship is concerned. So please take up this practice question. The Trade Act of US and Section 301 could possibly be important for prelims as well. And use this mains question and what we have discussed for practicing your answer writing. Now, coming to the next topic, we have an editorial on page number 6 that deals with the topic of mandatory period leaves. Recently, on 13th March, the Supreme Court of India has flagged the unintended risks of introducing mandatory period leaves for menstruating women. See, women go through severe physiological and physical pain during the menstrual cycle, from hormonal fluctuations to mood swings to significant health related issues, especially those who suffer from PCOS or PCOD. So it's generally considered as a progressive measure in the society to be kinder towards women during that period. And this is something which is being extended in the market, in the labor world as well, where women can take a leave so that they can rest, they can recuperate during a difficult time. And it is largely seen as a feminist and progressive move. The intention behind it is very good. In fact, in India, many state governments already have a law in this regard. Governments like Karnataka, then Kerala, and even Odisha, they've introduced laws and policies that mandate even private establishments to provide a mandatory leave, at least one leave per month during the time of periods. But however, experts argue that though the intention is good, it might end up having unintended consequences which will affect women themselves, which could affect the opportunities available for women at workplace, which could deprive them of equal opportunities at work. So the Supreme Court has taken the same stand that instead of rushing to provide mandatory period leaves, it's better to adopt a different approach. Because see, women are already at a disadvantage when it comes to opportunities at workplace because of prevailing patriarchal mindset of the society, the orthodoxy amongst the leadership within companies and managements. Women are often discriminated, right? They are usually sidelined during promotions, during appraisals. It's very, very difficult for a woman employee to rise up the ranks to the higher levels of management and leadership, right? Though they are highly capable, probably as capable or more capable than men, there aren't enough equal opportunities provided in the industry itself. Because see, women who bear the burden of pregnancy, bearing a child, looking after the family, they end up taking a break in the middle of their career. And this is often seen as a risk for the companies, the industry. So they tend to prefer not to hire women for certain specific roles or not to promote them, as they know that they will go on prolonged breaks. So this leads to discrimination against women, and they already face severe challenges at workplace. Along with this, if the government pushes a mandatory period leave, it will end up adversely affecting the opportunities available for women. Because this might create a disincentive for companies, for private establishments to hire women employees and workers. Because, see, there is ample evidence to show that the policy has often failed. Countries like Spain have experimented with this idea. When Spain introduced a similar mandatory period leave, it was widely celebrated as a progressive feminist move. But within 1 year of its implementation, it was noticed that most women were not opting for this leave. They were not opting for the leave at all because they realized that when they exercised the leave option, they were often discriminated by men at workplace, which affected their career prospects, their career opportunities. And this can have a direct impact on female labor force participation, which already remains quite low in countries like India. In India, as of 2017-2018, female labor force participation rate was roughly around 23%. This has increased with great difficulty to 41 to 42% by 2023-24. But this is still very low compared to global standards and global average. So, any policy which could lead to discrimination against women at workplace, which could hinder the opportunities available to them, which could disincentivize the industries to hire women workers, will have a negative effect. Though the policy is well intentioned, the thought behind it is good, but it might end up harming women much more than, let's say, going through the difficult period of the menstrual cycle. So instead of a mandatory leave being pushed through a law or a government policy, it's better to leave it up to the stakeholders, leave it to the industry to decide for themselves. Or women can use existing leave options for 1 or 2 days a month during the menstrual cycle. Maybe companies can have a more liberal policy without providing any additional leave as such, using the existing leave itself in a more liberal and easy manner so that women, if they want, they can take a break. This is seen to have better results, better outcomes, without impacting female labor force participation and without creating more hurdles for women at workplace. That is why the Supreme Court of India has taken a stand against mandatory period leaves. So, what is your take on this? Please let me know in the comments. It's a very sensitive social issue. So, let me know what is your view. Should there be mandatory period leave for women employees, or will it have unintended consequences? Is it better to allow women to choose themselves whether they want to take a leave or not? Now, moving on page 6, we have another important column related to climate adaptation. So let's understand what is climate adaptation and what's the focus of this article. See, when it comes to climate action to deal with global warming and climate change, there are 4 key pillars that were identified by the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change to mitigate emissions and to deal with the adverse effect of changing climate. Under the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, 4 key pillars were identified. This includes pillar number 1, which is mitigation. In mitigation, you focus on reducing the emissions, curbing greenhouse gas emissions, adopting clean and new alternatives like solar, wind energy, etc. So bringing down emissions and adopting clean, renewable sources of energy and moving away from fossil fuels is the focus of mitigation. The second pillar is adaptation, where you adapt to the reality of climate change. Because no matter what steps are taken, the world is likely to experience the adverse effects of climate change. In fact, according to studies, even according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, the world is already experiencing the adverse effects of global warming. For example, look at extreme weather events. How the frequency, the intensity of extreme weather events have gone up in recent years. Be it cyclones, be it floods, be it droughts or forest fires or glacial lake outburst floods. These extreme weather events, which are a result of extreme meteorological phenomena, they are being driven by global warming, and you're seeing the rising frequency and intensity of these extreme weather events. And this is likely to continue as global temperatures continue to rise and we fail to meet the climate action targets. So it's important to prepare the world to deal with the impact of climate change and create resilience to deal with the impact of these extreme weather events. This is what is adaptation, right? How you design your cities of the future, how you focus on protecting your coastal areas, how you focus on managing water availability, right? Because climate change can result in water scarcity in some regions, can cause devastating floods in some regions. So, water management is something which is a priority. So, this is adaptation, where you adapt as a society, as countries, as uh, humanity itself faces this threat, global level threat. You adapt to the upcoming changes, the reality of climate change through better planning, through better preparedness. So, that is the focus of adaptation, the second key pillar of climate action. The third and fourth pillars are technology and finance. Technology, because to move away from fossil fuels, to decarbonize the economy in order to reduce emissions, you need to adopt clean and new renewable forms of energy, solar, wind, nuclear, etc. And this technology is restricted, limited only to few countries. Not every country has access to it. You can't expect least developed countries or small developing nations, island states, to access such advanced technologies. So the focus here is to push the developed world, the industrialized world, to assist developing nations by sharing technology with them. The same goes for finance. Since developed industrialized countries are responsible for historical emissions, they share the burden of historical responsibilities, meaning they should contribute more money for climate action efforts. Because decarbonizing the economy and adopting new technology is very expensive. And you can't push this burden on developing, underdeveloped countries which have not contributed much to climate action or global warming and climate change. Right? The current global warming that you see is primarily because of the burning of fossil fuels for last 2 centuries, which was done primarily by developed industrialized countries of today. So they share that historical burden. They are accountable for that historical responsibilities. So under finance, the focus is on pushing these developed countries, industrialized nations, to provide finance and funding for developing underdeveloped countries so they can also adapt and implement climate action efforts. So these are your four pillars of climate action, and adaptation is one of the most important steps. Because according to IPCC reports, the world is already way past meeting the Paris climate targets. Under Paris Agreement of 2015, the goal was to limit the global rise in temperature, the average temperature, to under 2 degrees Celsius by the end of the century, and if possible, to keep it under 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to pre-industrial levels. But at the current rate at which we are going, and with leaders like Donald Trump in place, who thinks climate change is a hoax, there is no hope for the world to achieve this target, which means temperatures will continue to rise and we are likely to witness more and more extreme weather events. So, preparing for this eventuality is absolutely essential. That's why adaptation becomes one of the most important pillars in today's climate action and disaster resilience. So, climate action is more focusing on disaster resilience so that the world is prepared to deal with the impact of extreme weather events. More than mitigation, finance, and technology, I think what really matters is the adaptation pillar. It's better to gear up and prepare for what is to come in the next few decades. And that is what will provide some degree of protection for weak and vulnerable communities and countries. So, in the recent climate action summits that have taken place, right, adaptation has been a core focus area. In 2023, when United Arab Emirates hosted COP28, the UAE framework for global climate resilience was adopted. It almost entirely focuses on adaptation measures. Few specific priority areas and targets were identified. Based on this UAE framework for global climate resilience, at the recent Conference of Parties, COP30, hosted by Brazil in Belém, 59 adaptation indicators have been identified, and these two will be the pillars for adaptation measures in the coming years. So, what is this UAE framework for global climate resilience? So, it's an international agreement, a framework adopted at COP28, which was held in Dubai, hosted by United Arab Emirates. So, under global goal of adaptation, specific target areas have been identified through which the world can avoid the disastrous consequences of extreme weather events and disasters. So, for example, under the UAE framework, focus on understanding the impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment, which is also part of your Sendai framework on disaster risk reduction. The Sendai framework that focuses on disaster risk reduction also prioritizes the same goals to mitigate and reduce the impact of disasters. It prioritizes planning so that the global community can be prepared, better implementation of measures to prepare our cities, our coastal areas, hilly mountainous regions to prepare with to deal with the impact of disasters, better monitoring, evaluation, and learning. So these pillars were brought out through the UAE framework for global climate resilience. Under the UAE framework, 7 priority sectors were also identified. That includes water, food and agriculture, health, ecosystems, infrastructure, poverty eradication, and cultural heritage. Because, see, through better water management, through better water utilization, you can deal with most of the challenges arising out of climate change. When you take cyclones, for example, when you take floods, when you take droughts or urban flooding, they're essentially a water based phenomena caused with a disruption, massive disruption in the water cycle, right? So, better management of water by managing the groundwater table, by protecting rivers and wetlands and lakes, by reducing water wastage, by promoting recharge of underground aquifers, you can ensure there is better water availability to deal with water scarcity of the future. You can help contain the impact of cyclones and floods in the long run. You can ensure sanitation can be provided, better sanitation to prevent the spread of diseases. So, this is one way through which you can adapt to the reality of climate change. Similarly, in food and agriculture, adopting better practices to improve productivity, to cultivate drought resistant crops, going back to the basics of multi cropping instead of monocropping, right? Better efforts to conserve the top layer of the soil, the most fertile layer of the soil, to contain desertification, etc. So on and so forth. For each and every target sector identified, specific measures were discussed at the UAE COP28, which is part of this framework on global climate resilience. So, based on these identified sectors, at the COP30 in Belém, hosted by Brazil just last year in 2025, 59 specific indicators were identified. This is your Belém adaptation indicators. These are specific measures, like what measures can exactly be taken by governments to better adapt to climate change. So 59 such indicators were identified based on the UAE framework. It's also called the UAE Belém Work Program. So there are around 11 thematic areas that were outlined that includes water security, food systems and agriculture, health, infrastructure and human settlements, ecosystem and biodiversity, and disaster preparedness. So, on these specific themes, where specific targets have been defined, countries can adopt the strategy to ensure that they are better positioned with regard to adaptation. For example, when it comes to disaster preparedness for extreme weather events, having better early warning systems where you can track formation of cyclones, accurately predict landfall, and provide real-time alerts, evacuate the people from the path of danger so that you can save lives and protect infrastructure as well. Same goes for flood management. Same goes for drought management. Better early warning, better disaster planning and preparedness will significantly reduce the impact on human life, property, and infrastructure. So, the article here is entirely focused on using water as the core strategy to deal with climate change. The writers are mainly focused on better management of water because this is at the very heart of the impact of climate change that you are seeing today. All the big disasters from cyclones to floods to droughts, they're all water related, water based disasters. So, better water conservation, better water management, better sanitation will ensure that you can adapt to the reality of climate change and try and reduce the impact of these extreme weather events. So, according to the writer, India is already in a decent position because we have some existing schemes, initiatives that are focused on better management of water. The writer is arguing that water should be at the core of your climate strategy more than anything else. Better water management should be at the core of your climate action policy. So, in 2019, India carried out a very, very big reform. Different ministries and departments that managed water related issues, they were all unified and subsumed under one single central ministry with the establishment of Ministry of Jal Shakti. So this provides for a unified direction for water conservation, water management schemes in the country in coordination with state governments. Then we have initiatives like National Aquifer Mapping and Management. This program is focused on aquifer recharge, protecting the groundwater table. Then we have National Mission for Clean Ganga. So all these initiatives, they've gone beyond their mandate. National Mission for Clean Ganga, for example, it's not just restricted to dealing with pollution of the Ganga River, right? Apart from dealing with pollution of the Ganga River, it has expanded beyond this to focus on biodiversity conservation, protecting the water sources, enabling better groundwater recharge. So all these additional aspects have been introduced into National Mission for Clean Ganga. So the writer is arguing that such well thought out schemes, initiatives are required at the level of central government and state governments in order to better manage water supply and deal with water scarcity, to deal with droughts, to deal with floods and cyclones through better management of excess water, which means you have to plan your dam construction and water management projects and ensure that all the aspects of water and sanitation is brought under a single unified policy, right? Because if you don't manage water well, it will directly contribute to polluted waters, which affects sanitation and health. So all these are interrelated. So according to the writer, to focus on better adaptation, to better deal with the future impact of climate change and extreme weather events, we have to focus on managing water better and providing better sanitation. This is the key point that we take away from this article. Coming to the next topic on page 11, there's a very interesting article on Google Maps. I'll not take much time here. I just want to give you the gist of this article. Could be important for prelims, or maybe even for internal security under GS paper 3. So when you try to search a location on Google Maps, I'm sure many of you would have explored uh, different unknown locations. But when you zoom into certain regions or certain countries, you will see that the resolution of the map significantly drops. While high resolution images are available for certain countries and certain regions, similar high resolution maps are not available for few countries. So why is this difference? Why do you find such difference where some images are extremely blurry, as you zoom in, especially in countries like India, you can't really see the details. See, with today's satellite technology and Earth observation systems that we have, you can generate such high resolution images that you can even identify one individual person who's standing at that place. Or you can even read the number plate on a car or a vehicle. That is the advancement that we have in Earth observation technology today. But still, when you zoom on Google Maps, try doing it for India. When you reach the maximum zoom level, you can't see anything. It basically pixelates out and it's completely blurry. You can't identify exact structures or features, right? Only at a lower resolution, all the details are slightly visible. But as you try to go for higher resolution, the map automatically becomes blurry. Now, this is limited to few countries. Countries like India, countries like Israel, South Korea, and many others, they have restricted Google Maps primarily on security grounds, especially countries with hostile neighbors, with active conflicts. Like India faces a significant threat from Pakistan and Pakistan based terror groups. Right? Israel, as you know, faces a serious threat in the region. South Korea faces an imminent threat from North Korea. So, those countries which anticipate a serious threat, they are worried about possible misuse of high resolution satellite maps, because this is satellite intelligence, it's geospatial intelligence, which can be used by an adversary, by a hostile state actor, or it could be used by non state actors such as terrorist groups. They can use this for better planning their attacks. They can use it to identify your critical infrastructure, such as ports, airports, dams, power grids, etc., and carry out targeted, precise attacks, which becomes a major security risk for these countries. So that is why countries like India, Israel, and others, they have restricted Google Maps. Back in 2007, the then Manmohan Singh government issued a clear directive to companies like Google and any other satellite imaging firm to ensure that pictures beyond a certain resolution is not available to the public. Though it serves a big economic civilian purpose, it can be used for better navigation. It can be used to provide better services, location based services for civilian consumers. But governments like India have restricted it, right? Why? Because on security grounds, it presents a significant national security risk. So India has restricted companies like Google from making available such high resolution satellite maps. Clear? So this is something you need to note down. Next, on page 12, the Jammu and Kashmir administration has come out with a new initiative to provide support and secure justice for the victims of terrorism in J&K. So this is a lesson in counterterrorism. Counterterrorism is not just about fighting the terror groups and dismantling terror networks and modules. It's also about showing care and concern for terror victims. It's also about securing complete justice to the victims of terror, as innocent civilians are targeted by these terror groups who are state sponsored by countries like Pakistan. It becomes essential to provide complete justice and sufficient support for the victims and the families that are affected by acts of terrorism. Because in some cases, civilians will get killed. Maybe the bread earner, the breadwinner of the family gets killed, and the whole family is pushed into financial turmoil. Or let's say a person gets injured, gets disabled because of a terror attack, which affects the well being of the entire family itself. It uproots the whole family. So it becomes the responsibility of the state to take care of the victims of terrorism. So the Lieutenant General of J&K, Manoj Sinha, has promised to reopen some of the old cases to bring the perpetrators of acts of terrorism to justice, to secure justice to the victims by reopening old cases and restarting the investigations. especially where cases had reached a dead end, where the actual perpetrators were never caught. So some of these old cases are being reopened by the J&K administration through the office of the Lieutenant Governor. Along with that, employment is being provided to terror victims and their families. So families which have lost a earning member, they are being compensated, not just through a cash compensation, but through a job, a government job being provided to the families of terror victims. So this approach has been adopted by the J&K administration to secure complete justice to the victims of terrorism. So that's one update that you can add for internal security. Next, another topic on internal security. As I told you, there are a lot of articles today related to internal security. This article is related to the appointment of DGP of state police. See, the DGP is the highest ranked police officer at the state level who heads the state police, the Director General of Police. So you can clearly understand how pivotal this role is, this position can be, right? The DGP heads a particular state police. Now, the appointment of the DGP has always been slightly controversial because state police is often politicized at the state level because of state level politics. State governments would often like to appoint their respective candidates who are loyal to them, right? So, as part of police reforms, in the landmark Prakash Singh case of 2006, the Supreme Court of India laid down clear guidelines on how DGPs have to be appointed. There was a time when appointment of DGP was at the discretion of the Chief Minister and the Home Minister. They would often end up appointing their loyalists, right, from the IPS cadre without looking at merit or the seniority of the officers. And this ensured the politicization of state police, breeding rampant corruption also at the state level. It would derail the very function of the police force. So to bring some transparency and neutrality in the appointment of DGP, in the landmark Prakash Singh case of 2006, the Supreme Court issued 7 directives to the governments, both central and state governments. One of the directive was regarding the appointment of the DGP. Now, state governments can't randomly appoint any IPS officer as a DGP of the state. They can't do it. The Supreme Court has clearly laid a restriction on this. There is a clear process which has now been outlined. So, as per the process, the state government will send a list of IPS officers who are eligible by looking at seniority, rank, and merit and their service record. State government will first create a list of eligible IPS officers, usually who are in the rank of ADGP. Right? Maybe they'll forward a list of 5 or 6 names or 4 names. This list is sent to the UPSC, the Union Public Service Commission, which is an independent constitutional body. Now, the UPSC will set up an empanelment committee which will look at the track record of these suggested IPS officers. UPSC will basically look at this in a very unbiased, neutral manner, apolitical manner, purely looking at the seniority, the merit, the annual confidential records, and the service record of these officers. Based on that, UPSC will send back the names of 3 IPS officers who are eligible for empanelment, meaning they are eligible for promotion to the level of DGP. Now, state government can choose one of them. From the names recommended by UPSC, right? Usually 3 names are sent. One of them can be chosen by the state government. That's by the Chief Minister in consultation with the Home Minister and the Home Secretary and the Chief Secretary. They can choose one of the empaneled names given by UPSC. So this is the tight process which has been created to try and ensure the neutrality of the police force. And through Prakash Singh case, the Supreme Court also guaranteed security of tenure. DGP will be appointed for 2 years, a fixed term which cannot be changed. It can't be reduced. It can be increased, of course, it can be extended if the need arises, but it can't be reduced in any context. So, this ensures the DGP can function without fear or favor towards the ruling party. The DGP need not be loyal to the ruling party, right? And thus, it ensures a degree of political independence for the police force. However, there is a big controversy going on regarding the appointment process. Because, see, many states allege that the central government is interfering in the process through UPSC empanelment, that the center is trying to push its candidates and influencing the UPSC. Many states delay the appointment process deliberately, even though they know the current DGP is about to retire. Even then, they don't start the process of sending the list of eligible names to UPSC for empanelment. They delay it beyond a certain point so that they can appoint interim or temporary DGPs are appointed. Right? Now, this is not allowed under the rules. Supreme Court has made it very, very clear that there is no idea of any temporary DGP or an ad hoc DGP being appointed. Many states have tried this route. They delay the appointment deliberately, drag it for several months by sending the names very late after the current DGP has retired. So there has to be some police chief, right? So as long as UPSC is taking time, the state governments will appoint a temporary DGP for some time whom they want, who's more loyal to the ruling party. So UPSC has put its foot down. It has said Supreme Court nod is mandatory now for any delay in choosing the state DGP. According to the new norms set by UPSC, 3 months before the retirement of current DGP, the names have to be forwarded to the UPSC. So UPSC will have enough time to look at the service record, the merit, and then send the list of 3 empaneled officers from whom UPSC can select one of them. The state government can select one of them. So if at all state governments are delaying the sending of the names of eligible IPS officers, they will have to mandatorily get approval from Supreme Court. Is that clear? Coming to the next topic on page 4, there's an article related to Northeast insurgency. Some of the insurgent groups in Assam, they have signed a new agreement with the state government. Insurgent groups linked with the Hmar community and the Kuki community. They used to wage a war of insurgency against the state, but they had surrendered and they had laid down their arms and weapons back in 2012. For many years, few Kuki armed groups based out of Assam and Hmar armed insurgent groups, they were involved in active insurgency in parts of Assam and Northeast India. But they had ended their insurgency and violence and surrendered in 2012 by signing a suspension of operations agreement. So now the Assam government has finalized a pact. It has finalized a new pact with these outfits, a memorandum of settlement that will provide for development of these communities, that will bring the long history of violence and insurgency to a complete end. Though the violence has stopped from 2012 onwards, now it paves the path for the complete end of this violent insurgent phase and creates a development path to benefit the Hmar and Kuki community, to satisfy their demands, to address the resentment amongst these communities. So accordingly, as part of this memorandum of settlement or MOS, the state government will be setting up a Hmar Development Council and a Kuki Development Council. Both the councils will be headquartered in Guwahati, right, where the state government is also based out of, and it will comprise of officials who are nominated by the government itself. It will consist of a chairman, a deputy chairman, a chief executive officer, etc. They will administer these development councils and they will be nominated by the state government. So this development council will be provided with sufficient funds to look after local development of these areas where the Kuki and Hmar community are residing. It could focus on basic infrastructure development, education, protection of tribal rights, protection of land and resources of these communities, taking up road projects, for example, ensuring water supply. So, such local development projects would be implemented through these development councils, which are now being set up with adequate budgetary support from the state government. Is that clear? So, this brings the long standing violent insurgent phase of Hmar and Kuki community in Assam to an end. And the former militants, they will be accommodated into the mainstream. The state will not target or pursue them since they have laid down their arms and surrendered since 2012. They will be brought back into mainstream. The government will create opportunities for them through better education, skill development, or providing some compensation and houses, or creating jobs, so that the former militants can come back into mainstream society. So this is a time-tested path for conflict resolution and conflict management. India has always shown that willingness, the central government and the state governments as well. From Tripura to Mizoram, we have seen many such success stories in the past. So MHA was also involved in the talks. It was a tripartite negotiation involving central government, state government, and these insurgent groups. Now, please note that the Hmar community, they are linked with the Kuki Chin Mizo community. It's a larger ethnic group found across Northeast India and Myanmar. The Kuki community, primarily found in Manipur today, they are found across the region in Assam and other parts of the Northeast India region. And they are found across the border in Myanmar. And they are connected with the Chins. Same with Mizos, right? Mizos also have links with the Chin community in Myanmar. The Kuki community has links with the Zomi community, which are also seen as part of the Chin heritage. And the same goes for the Hmar community. They are found across Manipur, Mizoram, parts of Tripura and Assam, and they have close links with the Chin community across the border in Myanmar. So these are some basic details that you should know about the peace process with regard to Northeast insurgency. Coming to the last topic for today, the last article. On the supplement section, the Hindu carries an article that refers to something known as Nivation. This is in the context of glaciers and the melting of glaciers. See, when you look at the Himalayan mountain range, there are thousands and thousands of glaciers. According to a study which was led by the Geological Survey of India and other institutions, there are at least 26,000 glaciers present across the Himalayan belt. Now, in today's world, where global warming has become a reality, higher temperatures results in constant thawing and de-thawing of the glacial ice. Because of higher temperatures, especially during summer months, the ice, the snow which is accumulated, right, it will melt and it will refreeze again. So this cycle of thawing and de-thawing presents a significant structural risk to the glacier and the glacial sheet itself. The constant freezing and defreezing that keeps happening, this can threaten the structural integrity of the entire glacier and the glacial ice sheets that are present. This weakened structural integrity will increase the risk of avalanches. It will increase the risk of glacial lake outburst floods or GLOF events. If you remember the Chamoli disaster a few years ago, it was a rock ice avalanche in Uttarakhand, which killed many people, caused significant damage. If you look at the recent disaster last year in Uttarakhand with regard to the Srikanta glacier, all these disasters that have occurred, they have been linked with the constant freezing and defreezing of the ice material, especially on the sides and the bottom layer of the glacial structure. This has been brought out in a recent study conducted by researchers from ISRO using satellite data and other meteorological data. Now, this is where the term, a scientific, technical term, comes into picture. The term nivation. What is nivation? What are nivation hollows? Nivation is defined as the erosion of the ground that's present a snow bank, beneath a snow bank or a glacier or glacial sheet. The surface which is present, it will start eroding if the ice keeps melting and refreezing again and again. It creates a hollow on the sides and the bottom, which weakens the support for the glacial structure, and that is what will result in the slippage or the breakup of the glacial sheet, which can cause avalanches and GLOF events. To better understand nivation, take the example of an ice cream tub. Keep it outside and see what happens. Usually, it starts melting on the side, then at the bottom, right? And the whole structure becomes very loose. It starts moving around, whereas the central part remains properly frozen. Something similar happens with glaciers and glacial sheets as well. And the repeated freezing and defreezing will end up eroding the support soil structure which is there, which weakens the whole glacial structure, resulting in these possible disasters. So, studying nivation and nivation hollows will help in predicting possible disasters as well. So, on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope it's been an interesting and useful session. If you like the session, please press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.